can't hear my sound, but it's the doink doink from Law and Order. Some geek fun facts. Blog was Merriam-Webster's online #1 word for 2004. This year, Fortune magazine has named it the #1 tech trend. So as you can see, just by these two sources alone, blogging is becoming a very explosive new terminology for us. But what it also does is invoke some concerns that we as technology professionals, especially in a legal environment, need to be concerned about. So we have some snippets of blogs here. I was in my office in, I guess, early April, and I was talking to a part-time lab professional about, we really need to get blogs up and running so they could discuss things that were happening within the lab, etc. And I was told, to my dismay, or not knowing, that they already had blogs. And he told me where the blog was, and I said, oh, okay, not a big deal. So I started reading it.
And then, at the same time, on the same day,
on the same day,
I was working down, because I just started at Washington College of Law, and I wanted to get a feel for what everybody was doing. So that day I was working at the student help desk. And I was talking to them about all these different things that I want to put in place. And one of them was a blog. And a student said, oh, we already have a blog. And I said, no, we don't. She said, yes, we do. And I said, no, we don't. She said, yes, we do. So that was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and I had people visiting out of town, so I didn't pay much attention to that after that until I got a phone call from Greta.
At about 7:15, after I had started reading what you will see, excerpts of this blog, the first thing I noticed when I went to it was there was an AU logo. Copyrighted, AU colors. I don't know about you guys, but our AU colors are also copyrighted. There's AU blue and red. And, I started reading, and I was like, okay, this is not so bad, this is not so bad. Then, being the postmistress at WCL, I was like, oh my God, there's a part of one of my emails. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe this really isn't so bad. So then I found another email that was to the community, and it was from the dean. The other thing was, there was comments about this particular email that didn't bode too well for the school. So if someone did a search of this blog, how would prospective alumni, students, how would they feel about it? So then I went upon another one, and this is kind of her talk about what happened that day. And the thing that bothered me about this one is, if you notice in the second paragraph, it starts, indeed, I'm blogging from her. So, okay, I was like, okay, people do what they want to do. We're in academia. This is not like when I was in corporate America. This will be totally a cool thing. So then we went on. At that particular time, as Corinne said, we were in the process of trying to find a new OIT director. There was communication from the deans, the associate deans, the director about the search process, and I was like, okay, well, maybe this really isn't so bad either. So then I came upon this particular entry. We have a mouse problem at the Washington College of Law, and I think it's primarily because we're in the city. There's a lot of construction. But on the right-hand side is a picture of one of our employees in the stacks, which I'm like, okay, we're having some privacy issues now. Because the minute you step inside our building, you're covered by privacy. There are definite AU privacy issues, and I'm like, okay, this is bad. So in the back of my mind, I haven't called Corinne. I haven't done any of that. I'm just thinking this is getting worse as I read. But I continue to read. And the most striking word in this entry was talking about one of our faculty members as a two-faced hyena. And then I noticed that the copyrighted picture of this faculty member that's on our website had been lifted. And I was like, okay, this is bad. And then if you read down a little bit, the same faculty member was called a female dog. So by now I'm a little hysterical. hysterical. It's about 8 o'clock, and I'm like, okay, what do I do? But being me, type A personality, I decided to read some more. And there's another message about university dress guidelines and another internal email scanned in. And then finally I come upon this one, which is a daily report to this person's supervisor about everything that's going on. And I'm like, this is kind of bad, because we now have internal communication that's been scanned in. We have copyrighted material. I really don't know what to do. Part of my job is protecting the image of the university, as is everybody's. So what do I do? So I called Corinne. Corinne had people in from out of town, and I left her a message, and I said, read your email. It's very bad.
And this is what the student was referring to, because all of these different pieces, the AU seal, the entries about what they did in the lab that day, the internal communications, all gave, and plus there's also a schedule of all the lab work schedules were posted there. So it gave the impression that it was an authorized WCL AU blog.
Well, as we started doing research on what could happen, we had to call a number of people. We called Corinne's boss. We called, who in turn called the academic dean, who in turn called our HR rep. And we all started doing research on how blogging can affect your job. And the information that we received from this is actually quite surprising.
We found that a number of companies have fired employees for blogging, among them Blockbuster, Google, Microsoft. Microsoft is a really cool story in a way. The guy was a part-time employee. He actually worked as a contractor. He worked for Xerox. And he saw a shipment of Apple computers, and he took a picture with his phone and put it on his blog and with the caption, "Even Microsoft wants G-Fox." So he was fired. There's a guy who worked for a Canadian law firm who was using his blog to vent his frustrations, and he was posting libelous comments. He was fired. And a woman who was fired for referring to her boss as her wretchedness, and the vice president of enabling his fist up Kiora.
There also, I don't know if Ken Hurst is in the room, but the Durham, North Carolina Herald-Sun actually fired a reporter who logged onto a blog, not from her work computer, from her home, anonymously, discussing how the award guidelines at the Herald-Sun were unfair. She posted one night, she went to work, she was there for 8 hours, and she got fired.
And blogging in other countries is really not very well received. In Iran and China, some bloggers have been in prison. More Islamic countries are going that route. They've arrested several people. Minnesota Public Radio, the U.S. Olympic Committee, and we've heard that we haven't been able to confirm that law firms, before they hire prospective lawyers, are now looking to see whether blogs exist. We don't know specifically of any firms that have done it, but we have heard anecdotal evidence. Here's the article about the Iranian going to prison for 14 years. There's a flight attendant who then blogged about being fired for the blog, which also happens. You have to bear that in mind. When you let somebody go for blogging, it's going to be chronicled in the blog.
Not only is it going to be chronicled in the blog, as we found out going to the ABA Tech Show and several other places, even though they might take it down today, there are sites out there like archive.org that archive so many back websites that you can find it again. You know, in the case that we had, the student realized something was going on a little bit too late, but however, he was smart about 12 hours into this and realized that we were hitting his website a lot. And so he took down all of the inappropriate two-faced hyena, sniffles, talking about various patrons. I don't know how many of you are a public library, but except for exams, AU's library is a public library. The public can come in now, do research. In some of his blogs, he had taken pictures of patrons that were not students, not employees, had given them names like Snaggletooth, the Snaggletooth Stinky Lady, as a matter of fact, and it was very obvious that it was in the Washington College of Law. There was no misunderstanding. Now, with that comes the fine line of, as we did more and more research, we lost, about 3 days worth of work, because everyone on the technology staff first, and then throughout the law school, we did research to see who had blogs. And then you start getting into a little gray area if you have a student who is a worker and he's blogging about the school, because he has a right to say anything about the school. But the piece that makes it a little bit different is he's an employee. Elliot Milstein, who is at the Washington College of Law and former president of AALS, made a statement in the Eagle Online, which is AU's online newspaper, in February, where he said, employees can demand loyalty even online. If you're getting a paycheck from a place, they can demand that you be loyal and not say anything egregious against them as an employer. So, another geek fun fact, and that was my doink doink. A new term has emerged as a result of people getting fired for blogging. If you go to urbandictionary.com, to be deuced means that you lost your job because you wrote something in your blog, your journal, your website that was offensive, egregious, not appropriate, but the bottom line is you got fired because of it. So it's becoming, as I said in the beginning, more and more prevalent that blogging is becoming an employment issue. It's raising concerns that we haven't seen before. So we've decided to do a little blogging primer. We're not saying that you don't know what a blog is, but we want to be clear on all the facts. Blog is just basically a weblog. And a blogger is someone who creates and maintains a blog. It could be you answering back to a blog. Blogging is the process where you go in and you create and maintain this weblog. And a blog sphere is the totality of all blogs. There are a couple of them, Blogorama. And the thing that I have seen since this incident happened to us, some of the blog spheres are actually telling you what not to do so you won't get fired. It's like the top 10 list of how to blog properly and keep your job and your life intact. Now, what made this very interesting for us at the Washington College of Law, and I'm sure both Billy Joe and Corinne can attest to this, as all of this was going on with our employee, we were introducing blogs to our faculty and staff. I mean, literally, like one day, all of this happened, and the next day we were like, oh yeah, by the way, you can blog. And this is our example of our internal blog. So that also was a fine line. I mean, I think some of the emails that came in after the termination were, well, if it's such a bad thing, then why are you doing it? In particular, because not only did this employee work for us in technology, but one of the places that we had put the blogs, the Office of Admissions, and they were heavily blogging, he also worked there.
So it becomes a balancing act between the employee's right to speak one's mind and the employer's right to object. And there's a long legal history in this country, as you all know, about free speech and the freedom of expression. But most of these cases are almost always won by the employer. The possible exception could be when, in the case of Congressman Mike DeWine, he fired a staffer for blogging, where an employee, because of being working for the government, enjoys some kind of protection. And speech is protected. You have to remember, speech is protected from government censorship, but not from private employee censorship.
And for us, the balancing act became, once HR got involved and started reading the blog, because as initially, when I started reading it, nobody really thought it was a bad thing. We could not include any content. What our termination was a result of was the copyrighted material. We could not include the egregious things that had been said about the patrons or other co-workers or management. So that also is going to become a balancing act.
That was primarily an HR concern also, and we found out later through all of this research that we did that you're not constrained by that. HR didn't know. We didn't know because we hadn't done the research yet, so that's not necessarily a concern if you're going to fire somebody for blogging.
So what we want to address is, what are the ramifications when an employee blogs? What are the ramifications to the employee, the employer, and then us as technology staff? Because it becomes a huge balancing act for us as well, because blogs is technology, it's a new wave, it's cool, people want to do it. But as Corinne said, and we've said throughout this, it becomes a huge balancing act.
the blogger or the employee, their arguments for blogging is the right to express their views, whether they're mainstream or controversial, the right to vent their personal concerns, and their right to creative expression. The employer's concerns include a disclosure, possibly, of corporate secrets, the worry that clients or partners or superiors are going to view the manager as having absolutely no control over the employee, that employees will be less productive and waste corporate resources, that the blog may reveal that the blogger is a lesser qualified person, or that, in our case, we learned that the blogger was actually the manager. He had usurped his manager's position, and the manager wasn't really doing much, which was good for us to know. It was good. We kind of suspected that anyway, but it was good for us to confirm. But not necessarily something that we want the rest of the world to know.
But the other thing, when it comes to morale issues, the way I actually found out the blog was because of a morale issue. A lab employee came to me and said, you know, X, Y, and Z is going on. Why don't you check this out? Because that lab member was a bit frustrated with the fact that their manager was not managing, but this other part-time who was supposed to be their lateral staff member was managing them.
Other employees can also fear that they're going to be exposed on the blog, that something private about them will be exposed, and that did happen in a couple of the entries. There's the damaged reputation for the company. For instance, you know, say a prospective student or alum just does a Google search and comes up with this blog and finds out that we're rodent infested and that, you know, a lot of things that didn't reflect too well. And there's potential criminal activity liability if they're libeling public figures, or there's pornography or links to copyrighted material. There's potential civil liability because of the doctrine, and bear in mind I have half a law degree, so. The doctrine of respondeat superior for engaging in tortious behavior, like the intentional infliction of emotional distress from fellow employees. Tort liability could extend to the employer who doesn't exercise proper control or whose neglect has made the activity possible. So some companies and some lawyers are recommending that companies purposefully do not create blog policies. As it says, ignorance may not be bliss, but it can make for decent defense.
And in our case, ignorance was the defense. When confronted with the material that the manager of this blogger that was terminated, because he had responded to some of the blog links and was presented, he was like, I have no recollection of that. I mean, he was the perfect witness. I don't know what you're talking about. I have no recollection of that. And in 3 instances, we had the threads linked back to him, but he had no recollection of it. So in that case, ignorance did save him.
No company to date has been prosecuted for anything appearing on an employee's weblog, but lawsuits holding companies liable for employee emails may signal the perils for corporations that they may face if they officially recognize blogs, which is why they're staying away from blog policies. Numerous suits have argued that companies are complicit in creating hostile work environments when employees use corporate email to send sexual or otherwise offensive correspondence to coworkers. For instance, in 2000, a New Jersey Supreme Court ruled that Continental Airlines could be held liable for comments a pilot posted on a computer bulletin board describing a fellow female pilot as a feminazi. Legal experts agree that there is little employers can do to prevent workers from blogging on their own time, but if companies officially sanction blogs via a corporate policy, they may be responsible for what the employees say.
Things that the employee should know. And this goes to employee education, user education on our part as technology staff.
There's potential liability that the employees might bear because the language, although it's shrouded in the personal opinion, how do you extend that metaphor? It's cloaked within personal opinion. It still exposes the blogger to liability. Many bloggers might be ensnared before they learn of their legal obligations. Courts may find it to be a statement of fact instead, and therefore hold them liable. Disclosure of emotional challenges or personal peccadillos may make for entertaining or cathartic writing, but they may also form the basis for an employer's termination or refusal to hire. One of the students who we found was blogging had talked on several occasions about being out the night before and being trashed, and several of his fellow students being trashed.
Not only his fellow students, but also because we're such a tightly knit community, the staff hangs out with the students from time to time as well, and it talks about very, quote, unquote, important people in the staff being trashed with them.
Most states are at-will states. I'm sure you guys all know the law about that, but some of those, the at-will doctrine has been tempered by 3 exceptions. That the employers may not discharge their hires when, by doing so, they violate an implied duty of good faith and fair dealing, which is one of the concerns that our human resources people had. It violates implied contractual obligations, and discharge in violation of some public policy, for instance, whistleblowing. But just because an employee fires a salvo into the air and believes that to be whistleblowing, there is a certain code of conduct that, and some corporations may require an affirmative act before they go out and whistleblow to the general public. An employer considers itself a purveyor of written opinion or a news source, non-competition agreements may preclude blogging at all. There is some protected speech, but blogs so far are not falling under the protected speech doctrines. Public discussion, criticism of current policies, sexual proclivities of public concern, all of these things may not be protected. Disclaimers, some bloggers have attempted to put disclaimers on their site as a way to protect themselves. There's the click wrap agreement that if you go to a site, you agree to the terms and it seeks to indemnify the blogger. Those aren't working because a lot of people get to blogs not through the page where the agreement appears, and they would have to put this agreement on every single page, and they haven't been held to be contractually binding on the reader of the blog. And a disclaimer may also exacerbate an employee's concern, since just mentioning the employee's name makes them more likely to appear from doing a search and not looking intentionally for the blog. And merely stating that certain viewpoints are not shared by one's employer does not diffuse the potentially incriminating statements. A blogger may call an employee a slave driver, clearly opinion, but not a good reflection. If, however, a few words of caution about blogger privacy, though. If you, as a manager, go look into your potential employee's blog and dig a little deep and you stumble across employee's sexual orientation, national origin, or some other thing that could give rise to a discrimination claim, you should stay away from it. And you should, if the blogger is intentionally trying to conceal themselves and be anonymous, you should not try to dig deeper into it because you could set yourself up for an invasion of privacy claim.
And then it comes to what is our job as technology staff? What are our responsibilities as it relates to blogging in communities where blogging is going to be explosive? We have to, number one, make sure that our staffs understand when they sign the computer use policy what it says. In our case, we have gone through for all of our technology members and printed the computer use policy, made them read it, and made them sign it. Corinne is in holds of the signed copies. Then managers within the department have been given the education and the task that they have to disseminate that information to their employees as well, whether they be part-time or not. Because you want to make sure that everyone is on the same page. You don't want the ignorant is bliss thing where, oh, I have no recollection of that. Then when it comes to to blogging, as I said, we've just introduced blogs into our repertoire of tricks and trades. What are the best practices for them to be used, and how will they be seen? And that's going to depend upon your faculty, your staff, your university, and your university management, your law school management. Because whereas blogs are working extremely well for us, especially with the incoming class for the admissions group, it might not work for everyone. The other thing is, after you've educated your staff, you've set some policies, you have to educate the user population, both students, faculty, and staff. Because when students start blogging, it becomes a fine line between what's okay and an honor code violation. It can also, if law firms start following suit and start doing searches of the web to see what's out there, it can become a reason not to hire. And like I said, like Corinne mentioned, we haven't found any cases yet, but we do know that they're doing it. Before I came to the university, I worked for KPMG Consulting, and one of the things that KPMG Consulting does now as part of their background checks is check to see if you have a blog. And one of the things that's almost a total no hire is if you blast your current employer, you know, because they're like, where's the loyalty? Or if you're giving out secrets, or if you're talking about something that is shrouded, because being in technology, a lot of things that we do are company confidential. You know, being lawyers, they're company confidential, but KPMG has taken that step. So I think we'll see more corporations taking that step because they're worried. You know, it goes back to that fine line. There's a fine line between love and hate. There's a fine line between what you can say in your blog and what you can't say in your blog.
You should also keep in mind, too, that once a blog is out there, it's very difficult to retract it. So you could fire somebody for blogging, and it may serve as a deterrent for future bloggers within the company. But that employee that's now left, with the whole Microsoft guy, when he was let go, there was a whole series of blogs created around the fact that the Microsoft employee was fired. So there was his blog, which spawned many other blogs to discuss how unreasonable this was. Pictures of all the articles he was on, Keith Olbermann talking about all this. So, I mean, the company didn't come out very well anyway.
And in our case, I won't say it spawned the blog, but it definitely, on a couple of the blogs that we found of other students, it spawned conversation. Because, as it turned out, there were a handful of students, about a dozen or so, that thought that this particular part-time employee was a godsend to us. And it spawned some email communication between the administration of the law school, between all of us. But it did spawn a whole other conversation. Within 12 hours of his termination, he had removed most of the egregious items, namely the AU logo, had blocked out the things that he had said about employees and administration. But there were still some things that if you knew the situation and you knew how the blog appeared before, you knew what he was talking about. Because of this, bloggers are now fighting back. There's a committee to protect bloggers on Blogspot, and there's the rights at journalspace.com. And in these journals and in these blogs, bloggers are talking about freedom of speech, you know, all the normal stuff. Freedom of speech, why is it a problem if I blog and it's not on time and it's my opinion, etc. So again, we're going to a very explosive thing that we use every day, whether internally or externally, but we're going to see more and more legal and ethical concerns raised because of this. We have two very good blogging resources. Corinne's is actually favorite one is the Worldwide Water Cooler. Can you be fired for complaining about your boss online? But in all of this, we have read these in and out, and there is a very fine line. And it also depends, again, we go back to HR. How conservative is your HR department? Do you guys have any questions for us? Yeah. Sure. Yes, sir.
During the course of your research, I'm just guessing that you were looking for other bloggers from your university.
Mm-hmm.
Did you discover blogs from other law schools or libraries that were being raked over the coals? And did you notify them? That's my first question. regarding the copyright, and if you discovered any way to lock down those photos on your website. I know what they tell you, okay, you can lock, ours are locked down, but anybody who wants to get around it, anybody who knows how to do it, can certainly get around it.
To answer to your first question, in my research, I didn't find any other law schools that were being raked over the coals and blogging. To your second question, even if they are locked down on your website, you run into the problem of, we have a Facebook. You can go to a scanner, and as you saw with some of the email communication, they didn't take it from a web page. He simply went to the scanner, scanned it in, and, you know.
You're the only school that
To be honest with you, I saw other law school blogs. I didn't read them though. We were so
Focused.
Seriously, this took us 3 days to read.
Yeah. Harvard has actually, Corinne was at Harvard before she came to the Washington College of Law, but Harvard has actually terminated because of blogging as well.
Yeah. And it's not just, it doesn't have to be even about the school. It doesn't have to have a negative impact. They just don't want any reference to them as being contained in the blog. Any kind of reflection on them without their approval. So all of this stuff is going on and being said about them. It may be positive stuff. They just don't want their names mentioned anywhere other than where they intentionally want it.
Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. Number one, I'd like to think, I think it's a really, I come from a public law school from the University of Arizona, and we have a much tougher time terminating someone for something they put up on a website than I have on school work because the Constitution applies to us. My question is, sort of ratcheting down a little bit from your situation. We're starting now to get faculty blogs, and the question is, how much do you oversee what your faculty put up on blogs, because you want them to be in line with what's on your web page, you want them to look professional, because of the reflection, not because they're going to say something outrageous, but more the reflection that they're going to have on law school.
We'll answer that kind of in tandem.
Okay.
One of the things that we've done is we have created our own blog site, very much like Blogspot. So therefore, it has the touch and feel of American University's law school. It fits into what our content looks like, etc.
And we've also turned off some of the settings so they're not being indexed by search engines. Some of them are behind passwords. So we're protecting it as much as we can, but there are others. We found, when we were looking, we found other professors, particularly adjuncts, who had blogs on independent sites. There was no copyright violation. They were just talking about legal matters, really not associated with the school. They mentioned working at the school, kind of to give them some more credentials, but there was nothing offensive about it at all. And honestly, we haven't run into anything like that yet. I'm concerned about the SBA. But we're trying to co-opt the possibility of them going outside. So we'd like to have the SBA part when they come back in the fall as part of our official blog site.
And in conjunction with the whole SBA deal, my concern actually deals with one student. And I'm sure Corinne and BJ, you know which one student I'm concerned about.
At least one.
At every law school, everybody is like, okay, let's all go to his graduation. I am concerned because he is a fourth-year part-time student, so that means we have him for a year. He's going to find out about blogging. He has been very verbal about some of his concerns about the law school, whether founded or unfounded. And I'm wondering, because he is president of the Evening Law Students Association, what kind of impact he's going to have on our incoming law students, as well as, you know, we have students that come in and out, prospective students, and he always manages to be Johnny on the spot. And he is one that would refer them to his blog spot. So I'm concerned about that on a very personal level. Yes, sir.
Well, you mentioned that you host your own blogs as opposed to having to use outside ones. Is that with control? I mean, what was the kind of thought process? And,
Well,
are there
honestly,
any
we wanted to start using, the way that our admissions group was communicating with incoming students was through a Yahoo mail group, which didn't strike us as being particularly professional, although very efficient for her. And what we decided, that's when I was sitting down there at the student help desk, I was talking to them about every student who came up, I would talk to them about podcasting or study room reservations, just different things that we wanted to put in place. And when I was talking about the blog, that this would be an easier way for the different groups to communicate, and then we found out that there were blogging. The idea was really just to have a professional look and a way to communicate and have, like, our boss, who we've mentioned several times, is sitting right over there in pink, Billy Joe Coffee, which is the associate. So we wanted the law library to have a blog. We talked about new resources, just like what I'm sure all of you are doing. How many of you are blogging?
Wow.
You mean after today?
How many of you, well, here's a different question. How many of you blog personally? Because one of the things that we found out that there were people who blog personally with no mention of the university, just a conversation. But, it's kind of a hit or miss thing when we start talking to our colleagues. And, I even called several of my colleagues at KPMG, at Fannie Mae, and then inside of academia at University of Maryland, Baltimore, just to see what they were doing. And, the results were, it's kind of all over the place. It really depends. I think corporate America is more stringent than we are, but that goes with kind of everything. It's been my experience since I've been working in academia.
We wanted to get blogs going because students always say that they never got it.
Yeah.
However many times you email it,
You can email.
post it, it's in the elevator, it's line, it doesn't matter, they'll say they didn't get it. So if we keep everything, because that's what it is, it's a diary, and you can archive, and everything will be there in perpetuity, so a student, we can always say, did you read the blog? Because however we try to reach them through our own email system, they use Hotmail and AOL, they don't.
And see, being the postmistress for WCL, one of the problems that I'm running into is our students don't use their AU email. They forward to Hotmail, and Hotmail trashes mail from us because it's a forwarded message that's sent in bulk to another mail system. The other thing is we were printing, the docket is our official communication to all students. We were printing it up until the beginning of spring semester. So now it's online, they get it electronically, there'll be bits of it in the blog as it relates to the various communities who have put it. So we're trying to give them all the communication at their fingertips. And since we have gone wireless, we know that most of our students are, online in class. I know if any of you guys are faculty members, you hate that, but the fact of the matter is, your students are reading other stuff when you're teaching. Yes, ma'am.
I think the big concern that we noticed was with the career development side, because a lot of the things were really, the student didn't realize that they really are always applying for their future lawyering job, and they were actually, the fact that they had a copywriter, all of that was bad, but they didn't realize how bad they were making themselves look individually to prospective employers, prospective anybody's, even potential future spouses. And they just put down whatever comes out of their brain, or not brain. And I don't think they have a clue that it's an electronic diary, and it's out there to millions of people. So we talked to career development about even, okay, now you're doing the resume thing. Well, now you've got to move that on. You've got to talk about, if you have a blog, what do you have in your blog? You might not want to talk, about having been trashed at some bar last night. Potentially, after the ABA Tech Show, many, many people were talking in the recruiting line about how far down they are really doing to look at prospective employees. So that piece of it was really scary because they just don't think like they need to be thinking about technology. So something that's a really good thing technologically can be turned into a really bad thing.
And the other thing that came out of it too, in addition to career development, was our whole student affairs dean, and him having to look now at blogs for honor code violations. That's something that you don't think about.
Cutting and pasting exams.
Yeah. The other thing too, a little bit is the bloggers who were in offense were law students. They had torts, they had copyright, they had, you know, one of them 2 papers away from becoming a lawyer, one of them middle of the 2nd year. So, you know, and their defense too was we didn't know, the ignorance defense. We just didn't know. Yes, sir.
Do you enable commenting on your blogs?
Yes,
Or you do?
but they have to be approved. So they always go through, they can reply, but then it's sent to, or in the case of admissions, it's sent to the entire admissions office as responsibility for maintaining the blog. And they have to approve the reply before completion and can edit it.
Yes, sir.
So the blogger got fired in your case, did the manager get fired also?
The manager was put on a performance improvement plan, which we are smack in the middle of.
Yeah. Because of the whole ignorance thing. I have no recollection.
Right.
And because of the HR concerns that were raised, that someone could have spoofed him, could have entered his email address, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There was a lot of gray area.
And it was also a lot easier to fire the student who was blogging, the student employee, because he was part-time.
Rather than a full-time employer. Because as the woman mentioned from the state school, actually full-time employment is a little bit different in DC and at AU, just in general. It takes forever. Yes, sir.
Was the employee given the option of removing all the content and then?
No.
The employee did.
The employee did. He was not specifically told to do that. He did it upon his own volition. But once HR got involved because of the copyrighted material, there was no, like, we're walking a thin line on this. You have our copyrighted material on your blog. See you later, bye.
And in this case, it was so egregious. I mean, referring to the faculty member the way that he did,
Yeah.
and the patrons and unauthorized pictures.
Yeah, and especially, you know, again, going back to the fact that WCL is a public library, you're talking about citizens. And to use a BJ comment, we always want to be good citizens. And that just was not us as a staff being good citizens.
It was a good way for a deterrent effect, too, because it really slowed down the other bloggers.
Yeah. And it was a sobering experience as well for even some full-timers who had never thought about the issue, who had never, you know, we have some employees, I think, that came to the university as their first real job, so they don't look at it as a real job and understand the responsibility of having other people's technology in their hands. But I think that whole incident with this particular student was very sobering for them.
Did you get that school?
He had already voluntarily left
withdrawn.
a couple of years, like 2 years before.
No, he actually is at the position where in order to do the whole law school thing, he has to start kind of over again.
Oh, he's beyond the 6th year. Anyone
It
else?
might not be real.
Yes, sir.
I know this is maybe another question, but for some reason the whole explosion of the blogosphere thing, everything was sort of this fresh, unfiltered, freewheeling, everybody's revealing their real thoughts to some extent, and the anonymity of the web and all that. It seems like that era is over. We've moved from the Wild West to 1984.
It
Any
depends.
regrets about that? I mean, what do you think about that?
I think if he had tried to maintain some level of anonymity, we would have felt much worse about this. But if you printed out his blog, it said Washington College of Law Computer Lab.
Right. Well, if we go back and look at some of the slides,
There was no hiding the fact of where he was.
Not so much about this particular guy, but like you said, it has a pretty chilling effect. I mean, I gotta tell you.
I mean,
I
if you
see
look
no
at everything,
upside
if you
to a
look at
personal blog
everything,
at this point.
yeah, if you look at everything that's highlighted there that we blacked out, it was all company confidential. And that, for me, from going from private industry to academia was very startling. I understand what you're saying, but the fact of the matter is, I'm a technology professional, he was a technology professional. They're just things that you know you can't talk about, you know?
Well, you would expect, I mean, common sense
Yeah.
is not suspended in the law.
It was.
But it was. And
And we have another student who came to, after we distributed the computer use policy and the the web guidelines and made everybody sign an acknowledgement that they have read and understood and agreed to abide by. A student came and he's a law student, so he had a lot of highlighted sections and pages that he wanted to discuss in greater detail. And I kept staying away from the whole content discussion. I said, you know, you're entitled to say whatever it is that you want to say. You just have to remember that if it includes references to Washington College of Law, and we are so named, that's not going to bode well for you. And also, what Billy Joe was saying about as future employers are going to look at this, and if you're talking about what you did and what your fellow students did the night before, that's probably not going to bode well for you. But I'm not going to say anything to you about content. You can say whatever you want, so long as you don't drag us into it unless I have a question on this.
Well, and the other piece too, with some of the pictures, if you're standing out on Adams Street, I can take a picture of you all day long, post it anywhere I want to post it. But the minute, you know, our patrons and our students step into the Washington College of Law, they're cloaked by our Privacy Act. And that was something else that just was an utter violation. You know, I don't necessarily know if I want to have a picture of me on the web, personally, bending over, putting paper in the printer. You know, so.
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, we understand it, but it's that we go back to what this is. There's a very, very fine line.
Anyone else?
You had slides that had some websites. What software are we using for the blog?
Oh, it's in a homegrown. It's in Boston.
Where does the term deuce come from? Is that someone's
It was an
name?
employee who was fired, one of the first employees who was fired. Now it's called deuce dodging.
Deuce what?
Deuce dodging. If you're
live by
trying.
the guidelines.
Yeah.
Commit intent crimes.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much. They came off kind of
So it's,
I know, everyone. Track all these things.
Recommended rights.
well, and it's the whole conversation that Jackie had, but it's like,